that phone room is sort of a special, safe, and really cool place to be. Have you ever considered maybe volunteering at the King County Crisis Line here in Seattle? And we love the Lifeline. It's been amazing for us. We've sort of reached a tipping point, I think, with the culture of our center.
Welcome, everybody, to the Lifeline Crisis Center Director Interview Series that we are doing over the next few months. We're extremely excited to have John Reusser here, who is the director of the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline. Thank you so much, John, for joining us to answer a few questions today and tell us about your amazing center and the work that you do. Could you tell us a little bit about how you kind of got started in this field, how you kind of got connected with suicide prevention and with crisis centers?
Between returning to school and becoming a volunteer at the King County Crisis Line, which is Michael Redding's shop right now, I just really developed a passion for crisis intervention and mental health and suicide prevention, and got my bachelor's in social work at the UW and became an overnight phone worker in Seattle. And then I got my master's in social work, and right when I graduated, a phone room supervisor position came available in Seattle. And so I did that for about 2 years before moving back to Boise. Worked in mental health here for about 8 years, and there was a suicide hotline here, but it was the take a cell phone home and just you on your own in your house. You were the hotline.
Right.
And I just wasn't comfortable with that model since I came from this really supportive, warm, like there's somebody in the room with you when you take calls model. And so it just wasn't my thing, so I didn't get involved with that. But then when I heard they were restarting it and they posted a position for a founding director, I thought, well, I've got this weird Seattle experience, and I've been in Idaho back for 8 years, and it seemed like I was just the person that needed to do it.
Right.
There'd been a technical work group for about a year prior, putting together policies, procedures, corresponding with the Lifeline, because we knew it was going to be a Lifeline center to begin with. Launched in late November of 2012 with about 18 volunteers. We were open 4 days a week for 8 hours a day. And I supervised the phone room. I had a half-time volunteer coordinator, and that was the whole shop. And so cut to now, we have over 70 volunteers. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have 13 staff.
Within a really short amount of time, so 4.5 years, you went from 18 volunteers to 70, and from part-time to 24 hours and text.
Exactly. I've learned a lot about change and what's an acceptable sort of rate of change for my staff and volunteers and even me. So for some people it's never fast enough, and for other people it's too fast. And so finding that middle ground where people feel supported and the communication and the training are effectively disseminated through your shop is always tricky.
What would you say are some general successes that your crisis center has had over the few years?
Getting up and running was sort of step number one, and then getting accredited through Contact USA after being open for just a year was a big success for us. This past year, in 2016, there was legislation passed in Idaho to support suicide prevention efforts, and part of that funding is to fund 60% of our budget annually.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just a big deal for us. And we've sort of reached a tipping point, I think, with the culture of our center, that our phone room runs pretty smoothly and it's pretty fun and positive to be in there. We've ironed out a lot of the wrinkles that affect the volunteer experience. And so, it's just better than ever in terms of the day-to-day service provision.
I'm sure that with starting any new organization, and especially a crisis line, there are quite a few challenges. What were some of those things that presented themselves as barriers, and how did you get past those?
But coming from Seattle, I knew that I didn't want to do this unless we had a dedicated phone room model with a paid supervisor in the phone room 24 hours a day that was, a master's level clinician or equivalent in terms of experience. And that costs a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
So having to make that case that this is what this level of service costs, and this is why it's worth it, has been a challenge. I'm not going to reduce the level of support for my people. I'll just find more money.
Do you have any tips or advice for people on how to work with legislators in their state?
Connecting with that whole community of the suicide prevention community first, and then kind of working with those contacts to make relationships with legislators, coming up with a good combination of both data and stories. The data is shocking, but I think that some good testimonials and that emotional argument are just as important as the data. There's been a number of legislators that have had some suicide loss, either close their family or people that they know, and so that also, that's sort of the paradox of
Mm-hmm.
this. When there's a suicide that really affects the larger community, there tends to be more funding that manifests from that, and that's all. I've always struggled with that paradox.
But I mean, that's how a lot of this works, is you find what people care about, and you work to find some mutual benefits in that. And it sounds like you've been able to do that really well, which is awesome.
We were actually approached by some people in the spring of 2015 who said, we want to lobby for you, because we're a nonprofit, so we have limitations on that. So that was also, boy, if you can find somebody that wants to donate that resource, boy, that doesn't hurt. One of the biggest challenges is that we are the hotline for the entire state of Idaho. Idaho is very unique. Northern Idaho is like its own state.
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Idaho is like its own state, and Southwest Idaho is like its own state. And they're very different culturally, politically, and to be able to make long-term productive relationships outside of the capital city is also a challenge.
What are some other benefits of working with the Lifeline, especially, and you've seen your center grow over the last 4.5 years. What were some benefits over that time and going into the future working with the Lifeline?
We love the Lifeline. It's been amazing for us. Having that the 800 number when we launched was great, because there was already it was already known somewhat around the state. There was sort of outreach materials readily available. The fact that it's shared by the National Veterans Crisis Line was helpful in getting that support from our military community and our veterans community. Having that 24/7 capability and to have calls roll to another center so that every call is answered was really, really critical. It still is. The Network Resource Center has been really helpful. We have our volunteers, when they come in for their final listing shift at the end of training, do the avatar trainings online, and they like those. We've used some of the templates that you have for proving for the cost savings of prevention. We've also used the one-pagers for partnerships with emergency departments, and we do have a partnership with our local emergency department. Being able to have the talking points and the statistics and the studies to bring in to that room full of hospital administrators and potential skeptics was just so helpful. To have that stuff to really lend legitimacy to those approaches is invaluable. Yeah.
I'm wondering, thinking about all the things that you told me today, what's the way that that the Idaho Crisis or Suicide Prevention Hotline plays a role in suicide prevention, both for the community and for the state, but also for the people at the crisis center? We have outreach materials in most of the high schools around our state and the middle schools.
that phone room is sort of a special, safe, and really cool place to be. And so that's part of our overall strategy of supporting our volunteers. We're working in a bunch of trauma-informed care things now, self-care plans for staff and volunteers, really focusing on how we can develop our volunteers, because they're learning these amazing soft skills. They're practicing them on the phones. We have a lot of testimonials from our volunteers where they spontaneously use those skills with their spouses, with their kids, with the grocery store. Like, many of my volunteers have done successful interventions outside of here with the skills that they've learned. And we're building a suicide safer state, sort of one volunteer at a time and one phone call at a time. And it's really cool.